Hi, this is Eric from Fit, and today I have my special guest. You know him, you love him, and you will continue to love him because he'll come back many more times. His name is Andy, the Dietitian, and you folks know him from all the things he's done in the past. And today we have a very special topic because you remember last time we talked about mental health, which is of course huge, but going back to the brain, we're talking about foods and natural ways that really can help battle or even slow down the effects of Alzheimer's and dementia. So Andy, can you please just introduce yourself again for those that don't know?
Yeah, guys. My name is Andy DeSantis. I am a registered dietitian in Toronto, blogger, author, and all that good stuff. And yeah, today we're going to talk a little bit about, nutrition, the role of nutrition in the prevention of Alzheimer's and dementia. And the reality is, we're living longer here in Canada than ever before, right? Our population is aging. Yeah. We have better health care, better nutrition, better medicine, all of this. But what that means as well is the diseases that affect older adults are going to become more widespread because we're living longer, right? And so this is partially why the topic of dementia and Alzheimer's disease is becoming more popular, or not more notable rather.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and I'm glad you made that point because it's worth noting that as human beings, all of us are living longer. We all want to live longer, but you're right. Some of the things that we're talking about, whether it be Alzheimer's, dementia, whether it be whatever it is, cancer, whatever it is, are more likely we're going to see them more because we're living longer. But that shouldn't also stop us from looking into ways that we can continue to live a high quality of life, regardless of how long we live. So right. I want to ask you, and I know we kind of spoke a little bit about this off camera. What are some of those things? And I know you mentioned it earlier. You haven't mentioned it yet on camera, but what are some of those things that can really maybe reduce that risk that we might get dementia and Alzheimer's and whatever it may be the case?
I mean, look, the reality is that this is a topic that is getting more and more attention for the reasons that we discussed, right? So we don't know for sure what is going to prevent them, but what science is showing us is two things, right? There's something called the MIND diet. And the MIND diet is basically, it's a combination of two types of diets. It's the Mediterranean diet, which I'm going to discuss, and the DASH diet. Right? So the most important thing you need to know about the DASH diet realistically is that it controls how much sodium you eat. Okay? Because many people in Canada consume too much sodium, especially men, right? So men not only consume more sodium than women, but they're more likely to have high blood pressure. They're more likely to take blood pressure medication. Now, the connection between blood pressure and dementia, it's still something we're studying, but having high blood pressure over a long period of time could increase your risk. That's why controlling sodium intake, having less processed foods, less foods out, cooking more at home, using less salt is very important. That's number one, right? Yes. And number two, we have the Mediterranean diet, right? Which is something that you may have heard of, but how does one follow Mediterranean diet? You know what I mean? Well, let's just take the average person, okay? So the average person, which is okay. They have a lot of chicken and a lot of beef, a lot of eggs, a lot of milk, right? Nothing wrong with those foods. But for many people, that's the base of their diet. It's at the bottom of the pyramid. The Mediterranean diet flips that upside down. So what it does, it says, listen, have less poultry, less beef, right? Less dairy, have more of everything else. And what's everything else? It's the legumes that we always talk about. It's the nuts and seeds we always talk about. It's the whole grains that we always talk about. It's the fruits and the vegetables. So that style of eating combined with less sodium together is more or less the best thing we know right now to prevent the risk of cognitive issues in older age.
Oh, that's very awesome that you say that because as I mentioned to you earlier, I was looking into, and they were talking about foods that are really good in regards to it, but also foods that were not so good. And you kind of mentioned some of the other ones. Like when you mentioned something about sodium, it kind of made me, the first thing I thought of was all those, heavy meats and,
the processed meats.
And all those processed foods. And I was like, that sounds a lot like what Andy's talking about in terms of diet and the connection between the dementia and Alzheimer's. And it's funny that we talk about it because you're right. It's true that this situation, we're not exactly true what 100% what causes it, because we know that sometimes when we talk about family history, there's some family history aspects also. So, but it's also so important to, like, even though there's family history, that doesn't mean, and I think what Andy's trying to get across too is, just because what your family history is doesn't mean you're guaranteed to get these. You know what I mean? Yes. Like, I can tell you from my personal experience, like my dad has high blood pressure, he has high cholesterol, he has all of the above. You know, at the end of the day, he's had a stroke before. But at the same time, I'm not saying that I'm probably more likely to have some of these things, but that doesn't mean that I just should accept what my history is and not live differently to kind of reduce the risk of these things. That's what you're kind of saying, right?
I'll tell you right now, that's a very important point. That's a very important point that I think is underappreciated, because I think that I do encounter people who kind of say, like, oh, it's the luck of the draw if I'm going to get this or not. And that's not, look, like, sure, there always is chance involved, but it's not like that. There's a lot of things that you can do to reduce your risk. And you mentioned processed meats, hot dogs, sausages, salami, stuff like that, okay? That, unfortunately, nothing wrong with having that once in a while, maybe once a week, a little bit once a week, once a month, whatever. That stuff, not only is it the red meat, it also has a ton of sodium, right? So as the things that we don't need. So it's the red meat, which we're trying to minimize. It's the sodium, which we're trying to minimize. And it has preservatives added to it, which aren't helping us either. So I'm not one to tell people too much not to eat this, not to eat that. I'd much rather tell you eat this, eat that in a positive way. But if there's one food that's worth your time to eat less, it's definitely those processed red meats.
Yeah. You know what? When it comes down to a lot of things when we talk about health, that they usually are typically the culprits in a lot of cases when they talk about foods you should avoid eating. But
they can increase the risk of also colon cancer. That's heart disease as well. So unfortunately, as much as you might like those foods, you really have to be careful about your intake, especially as you get older in age, because the older you go, the higher risk you are for unfortunately for negative health outcomes to happen. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate this. I appreciate the information you gave, Andy. I think it's awesome. And I think we will continue to give you this information, because I think these topics are really important, not just for the people that are 40 or 50 or 60, but as he said, we're all trying to live at a higher quality of life in our 70s, 80s, and even 90s. And I've seen the difference between a high-functioning 80, 90-year-old and someone who is 60, who's not even just as good as the high-functioning 80, 90-year-old. So
healthy aging, it's very important.
It's healthy aging is very important. So Andy,
fitness is key as well.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Can you give us a little plug? I know I always say it. Tell me about your books.
Yeah, I mean, well, look, I've written a bunch of books, so I've got a low sodium. So if you've listened to this video today and you're concerned now that you may be having too much sodium, I've got a low sodium cookbook. If you go on Amazon, type in Andy DeSantis sodium, you're going to see it. I've got a book on the DASH diet. You know what I mean? If you're trying to incorporate that. So I do have books out there for those of you who are interested. What I would say as well, honestly, so you and I, we chat weekly about topics in the world of nutrition relevant to older adults. Anyone who's watching this video, put a comment below if you have a topic you want us to discuss. That's great inspiration for us, and then we have more fuel for the fire. So don't be afraid to give us a topic you want to talk about.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. You know what? As I said, great minds think alike, and I appreciate that comment. So we're actually done, but I want to say thank you again, Andy. And next week we'll cover something new. Add a comment, like he said. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Take care, guys.
All right. Bye-bye.